So, as you can tell, I'm not going to be here today, and I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page in what you are expected to do today. Yesterday, we did some really great work and had some really smart thinking in terms of sharing what we learned about different cultures. And we talked about in some classes how what would be difficult in moving to a new country and trying to fit in and get used to the culture. And then we looked at those that story chain and we worked on making possible sentences with those words. And some of you did a really great job of incorporating 2 to 3 words in one of those sentences. And so now I think that we're in a really good spot and we're actually ready to read the story. And so the story that we're going to read again is All American Slurp, and it's on page 424 in your literature book. Before you start reading, though, there is a little catch. I want to make sure that you are recording your thinking and paying attention to certain things in the text. So I'm going to ask you to get out a sheet of paper if we haven't already done this in class, and we're going to make a note catcher. And we've done this before, but I want you to go ahead and set up your note catcher with 4 squares. And then if you take a look, our top square is going to be observations about characters. So as you're reading the text and you're meeting the narrator, her brother, and her family, any thinking that you have in terms of who the characters are, you're going to go ahead and put down in this square. Next to that, since the other big thing that we've been talking about is conflicts in stories, this is where you're going to keep track of where you see potential problems. So you might choose to write, well, here's a man versus self conflict, or you might just make a bulleted list of problems, potential problems that you see that could be happening in the text. And then my favorite one that I like to leave and make sure that we include is this idea of surprise and wonder. So as you're reading, what are some things that are surprising you, things that are different than you might expect? And then wonders would naturally be your questions. What are you wondering as you're reading? What kinds of things are you trying to figure out? And then to tie into our theme of the unit, this last square is for the role of food. So you're going to see that food plays a really big role in this story. I'm just going to ask you to keep track of what is it that food is showing us or doing within the plot and the events of the story. And then one last piece, in case that wasn't enough for you to think about, are these 2 questions. So this is kind of our essential question and what we're looking at answering. So as you're reading the text, I want you to think about how food shows the differences in cultures between the American and the Chinese. And then on the opposite end, how is food used to bridge the gap between the cultures? And bridging the gap is kind of a weird term, so a simpler way to say it is how is food used to break down those barriers, or how does food help bring people together? So I thought today, since I'm not there, and this is what I would have done in class with you anyway, would be to start reading the text with you and show you how I would use my note catcher in the first part of this text. So if you haven't already, go ahead and put me on pause. And then open your textbook to page 424, and then let's get started. So I'm going to ask you to follow along in the text as we read. So it starts with, the first time our family was invited to dinner in America, we disgraced ourselves while eating celery. We had immigrated to this country from China, and during our early years here, we had a hard time with American table manners. So I already see something that I think might happen in conflict. And so I'm going to put on my paper a potential conflict that I see happening in the story is maybe problems with fitting in. So I went ahead and just wrote that right here. In China, it says we never ate celery raw or any other kind of vegetable raw. We always had to disinfect the vegetables in boiling water first. That to me is a surprise. Like I've never heard of anybody say that you have to disinfect a vegetable. Maybe disinfect your bathroom or disinfect the countertop, but a vegetable? So in my surprise, I'm going to put, I'm surprised they disinfect vegetables. That is not something that I'm used to hearing. When we were presented with our first relish tray, the raw celery caught us unprepared. We had been invited to dinner by our neighbors, the Gleasons. After arriving at the house, we shook hands with our hosts and packed ourselves into a sofa. As our family of 4 sat stiffly in a row, my younger brother and I stole glances at our parents for a clue as to what to do next. So that tells me right off the bat. So here I know an observation about the character, the narrator, is the oldest child. And I'm also thinking that she's a little bit uncomfortable and nervous because it says that they sat stiffly in a row. I think it sounds like all of them are kind of uncomfortable. So maybe in an observation, I might put can't spell when I'm trying to do two things at once. That I notice that they're not very comfortable or confident about things. Um, let's see, my younger brother and I stole glances at our parents for a clue as to what to do next. Mrs. Gleason offered the relish tray to Mother. The tray looked pretty with its tiny red radishes, curly sticks of carrots, and long, slender stalks of pale green celery. Do try some of this celery, Mrs. Lynde, she said. It's from a local farmer and it's sweet. Mother picked up one of the green stalks and Father followed suit. Then I picked up a stalk and my brother did too. So there we sat, each with a stalk of celery in our right hand. Mrs. Gleason kept smiling. Would you like to try some of the dip, Mrs. Lynde? It's my own recipe, sour cream and onion flakes with a dash of Tabasco sauce. Most Chinese don't care for dairy products, and in those days, I wasn't even ready to drink fresh milk. Sour cream sounded perfectly revolting. Our family shook our heads in unison. So now I have a question. I'll wonder, why don't they eat dairy in China? So I went ahead and added that in my surprise and wonder box. So then I'm going to keep reading. Where are we? Mrs. Gleason went off with the relish tray to the other guests, and we carefully watched to see what they did. Everyone seemed to eat the raw vegetables quite happily. Mother took a bite of her celery. Crunch. It's not bad, she whispered. Father took a bite of his celery. Crunch. Yes, it is good, he said, and looking surprised. I took a bite, and then my brother. Crunch, crunch. It was more than good, it was delicious. Raw celery has a slight sparkle, a zingy taste that you don't get in cooked celery. When Mrs. Gleason came around with the relish tray, we each took another stalk of celery, except my brother, who took two. There was only one problem. Long strings ran through the length of the stalk, and they got caught in my teeth. When I helped my mother in the kitchen, I always pulled the strings out before slicing celery. I pulled the strings out of my stalk. Zip, zip. My brother followed suit. Zip, zip. To my left, my parents were taking care of their own stalks. Zip, zip, zip. Suddenly, I realized that there was dead silence except for our zipping. Looking up, I saw that the eyes of everyone in the room were on our family. Mr. and Mrs. Gleason, their daughter Meg, who was my friend, and their neighbors, the Badals, they were all staring at us as we busily pulled the strings off of our celery. So I'm kind of noticing here, maybe in the role of food, that in this case, something as simple as celery is a source of embarrassment for the family, like something that they are ashamed of, and maybe even kind of tied into this idea of problems with fitting in. So I'm going to put for my role of food, I'm just going to write the celery. I'm just put equals embarrassment for them. And so as you read and you can continue reading on your own, you're going to see food mentioned several times besides just celery. And I want you to think about what kind of feelings or emotions are associated for the narrator with food, and maybe how these ideas of this role of food is playing into the conflict as well. So I'm going to ask you to hunker down today. You're going to read by yourself. I'm going to ask you to keep track of your thinking. I'm hoping that with the length of your story, you're going to find yourself running out of room, and you might need to continue this on the back side of your page. You should be able to finish this story, or at least get pretty darn close by the end of class. And I'm going to ask you to save the last 8 minutes of class. I'm going to put a discussion question on Schoology. And don't be surprised, I'll tell you what it is now. It's the same question that we were looking at. And I'm going to ask you, finished or not, wherever you're at in the story, to go ahead and respond to these two questions based on what you've read and what you've seen so far. And tomorrow, when I'm hopefully back, because my daughter's really sick, Um, we will start talking about themes in the story. So if you want to put a little nugget in the back of your brain, start thinking about what life lesson is the author trying to teach me by using this story. So be really good today, be on your best behavior, and work really hard and make me proud. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.